Every year, the world gathers to hear the same kind of promises. At an Apple keynote, a presenter walks out on stage and says something like, "This is the best iPhone we've ever made." At a Tesla unveiling, the claim is, "This changes everything." Streaming platforms promise the future of entertainment. Tech companies say this is the most advanced system yet. And corporations and entities build entire campaigns around this idea and this word, better. Better speed, better performance, better clarity, better experience. We are conditioned to believe that what comes next will surpass what comes before. And yet, by the next year, what do we have? A new better. Another version, another improvement, another upgrade. Because in our world, better is always temporary. But then we come to the book of Hebrews and we encounter a completely different kind of claim. Not marketing hype, not incremental innovation, not religion 2.0. Hebrews announces something absolute. Not that Jesus is newer, not that Jesus is improved, not that Jesus complements what came before, but that Jesus is absolutely and permanently better. He is better than angels, he's better than Moses, he's better than Joshua, he's better than priests, he's better than temples, he's better than prophets. Everything that came before him was real, and it was God ordained, and it was glorious, but it was partial. And when we refer to better in relationship to Jesus, we are talking about always better than. Anything past, anything present, anything future, Jesus is better. And what's remarkable is how the book of Hebrews starts. There's no greeting. There's no thanksgiving. There's no introduction to the author. We don't even know who wrote this book. Hebrews doesn't seem to ease into its argument. It begins with thunder. No warm up. Just a revelation crashing onto the page. Because when you are declaring the supremacy of the eternal Son of God over everything, you don't build to it. You let it roar from the very beginning. And that is exactly what the author of Hebrews does. We start, and it is a splash right from the get-go. So let's read Hebrews chapter 1, just the first 4 verses. This is considered the introduction, and you will see what we mean as we walk through today, what we're talking about when we're talking about there's no easing into this thing, no warm-up, no build-up. We're jumping right in. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, and through him he also created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purification for sin, he sat down at the right hand of majesty on high, having become much superior to angels, as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. You see what I mean? In these opening lines, which, by the way, in Greek, one long sentence, Hebrews erupts into a majestic vision of the Son, who is the better prophet that reveals God fully, the better priest who cleanses sin completely, and the better king who rules forever. And I want to look at those 3 things one by one. First, Jesus as the better prophet. The author begins by reminding us of something very foundational. God speaks. Amen? God speaks. Christianity is not built on human discovery. It's not built on our searching to find God. It is built on God speaking down to us in divine revelation. We don't climb our way up. He comes down. And in verse 1, it states that under the old covenant, when God spoke to us, when He spoke down to us, He did so at many times and in many ways to our fathers by the prophets. This phrase carries a lot of important weight because it reveals that the former speech came in installments and it came in different modes. Here's what I mean. Many times. It doesn't say He spoke just in the past. In many times. This means piece by piece, era by era, generation by generation. When it says many ways, God spoke in a whole bunch of different ways. Visions, dreams, burning bushes, tablets of stone, poetic oracles, symbolic actions. And He spoke by many prophets. By the way, the first prophet was Moses. We usually don't think of Moses as being a prophet, but Moses was the first prophet. And so Moses and all of the prophetic successors after him, God spoke through. So God spoke in many times. He spoke in many ways. He spoke through many prophets. Now, the point here that the author is making is not just to point at the diversity of the revelation. The author is trying to help us understand that the Old Testament revelation was fragmentary. It was incomplete. It was imperfect. It had a gradual character to it. It was all true. It was all good. But it was not complete. It did not give the full picture. And then comes the hinge of this entire introduction. But. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, He has spoken to us by His Son. Notice, not through His Son, by His Son. There is a grammatical shift here. Under the old covenant, God spoke through means of prophets. Now He's speaking by His Son. This is not simply a better messenger. This is better revelation. Notice carefully what the author is saying. It is a contrast between the partial and the imperfect and the complete and the perfect, between servants and the Son, between many voices and the one. Dennis Johnson points out, the Old Testament revelation was progressive and true, but incomplete. It was like light breaking through the horizon at dawn. Real light, true light, but not yet noon. Jesus is noon. The Old Testament prophet said, "Thus says the Lord." What did Jesus say? "For I say to you." See the difference? The prophets carried revelation. The Son is the revelation. God's final speech is not a sermon. It is a person. This is where Hebrews is already pushing us into very high Christology. The word Christology means the study of the Christ. Ology, the study of. Biology is the study of life. Theology, the study of God. Christology is the study of Christ. And the author is pushing us in the very beginning of his long sentence into this high Christology. Jesus is the final revelation of God. Before we get into angels or Moses, the writer is establishing this foundational principle. The Son is of a completely different order than everything else. Everything about Him, everything about Jesus, His words, His works, His compassion, His authority, His cross, it is all revelation. And there is no higher revelation to come. There's no covenant upgrade. There's no other prophet waiting in the wings. Christ is not the best among many. He is the end of the many. This is why in the book of Hebrews, drifting away is so dangerous. Because if you turn from Moses, you have other prophets. If you turn from one prophet, you might have another prophet arise. But if you turn from the Son, where do you go? Where do you go? There is no fuller word, no clearer revelation, no better prophet. And then I want you to notice this phrase, in the last days. You see that phrase? Long ago, and many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets, but in these last days. Now, as soon as we hear the words last days, because we have been programmed wrongly, we have been programmed to think last days means end of the world. It does not in Scripture. The New Testament, using the phrase last days, is not talking about apocalypse. Okay, it's not talking about the clock ticking. That language is fulfillment language. Let me show you what I mean. In the Old Testament, you had this covenantal language that was being used. They would use a phrase like, in the latter days, in the days to come, in the next age. All of that language in the Old Testament, okay, was pointing to a fulfillment. So for instance, think of passages like Deuteronomy 18, the promise of a greater prophet like Moses. Think of Isaiah chapter 2, the mountain of the Lord established in the later days. Jeremiah 31, in the later days, a new covenant will come. Latter days in the Old Testament pointed forward to an age when God's promises would reach their climactic fulfillment. You with me? So Old Testament latter days pointed forward. Then the New Testament comes along and says the fulfillment of the latter days is here. We're in the final days. We're in the final age. We're in the fulfillment of everything the Old Testament pointed to. Those promises in the Old Testament weren't about a countdown clock. They were about arrival. When Hebrews says in the last days, it is declaring the age of fulfillment has begun in Christ. The long anticipated era has dawned. It is the decisive era in which God now fully and finally speaks. In other words, the prophet spoke about anticipation. We live in the age of realization. So the final days, the last days, end of days from the New Testament is about the realization that Christ has come to fulfill the Old Testament. This is why the Son is not just one more chapter. He's the final chapter. The Old Testament builds tension, Christ resolves it. The Old Testament makes promises, Christ embodies them. The Old Testament speaks in shadows, Christ steps in to the light. This is why Hebrews says, the last days have begun. Everyone in the church age has been in the last days. I don't know why I paused right there. That was weird. Y'all notice that? In the last days. We're just going to keep going. Not the end of the world, but the end of waiting. You see that? Not the end of the world, but the end of waiting. This strengthens the whole better prophet argument. Because if the last days are fulfillment days, then Christ is not just another voice in a line of prophets. He is the goal toward which all prophetic visions pointed to. They were aimed at. So history can't move beyond him. And all redemptive history converges in him. This is why he's better. Ultimately and finally better than all the prophets that came before him and all the revelation that came before him. Now, this poses a question. How come his prophetic message carries so much authority? We're going to talk about that in a minute. So just pause on that question. Why does his prophetic message, why is him being the last prophet, why does it carry so much weight? Why is Jesus better than Moses as a prophet? We'll talk about that in just a minute. Let's go to the second one. Jesus is the better priest. It's interesting because right in the middle of this sentence comes the issue of sin. The problem of humanity is implied right in the center. It's inserted right in the center of this sentence. And I think this is because the reason why Jesus came is to deal with this problem. And here's the truth. The greater prophet coming is not all we need. We don't just need the revelation. We also need a better priest. We also need a better ministry that's going to come than what the Old Testament offered. Look at the second part of verse 3. After making purification for sin, he sat down at the right hand of majesty on high. After making purification for sin. Do you see the assumption of the sin problem there? We human beings have a sin problem. We have an issue that must be dealt with. And Jesus comes to make purification for sin. Now, and that phrase can just be said so quickly by us in English. Make purification for sin. And we can just kind of roll by it. Yes, he died on the cross. And we can roll by it. But you've got to understand, this is not some simple phrase. It carries the entire weight of the Old Testament sacrificial system. So we can go by it real quick. Make purification for sin. 4 words in English. That carries the weight of the entire Old Testament sacrificial system. That's massive. Under the Old Covenant, purification required blood. It required daily sacrifices. It required annual atonement. It required endless repetition. The priests never stopped in the Old Testament. Every sacrifice in the Old Testament actually said the same thing. Not yet. Not yet. Because the conscience was never fully cleansed. All of that Old Testament sacrificial system actually pointed forward. It pointed towards something. It anticipated. It foreshadowed, but it could not perfect. But in the book of Hebrews, we read, he made purification for sin. Not he assisted it. Not he initiated it. He made it. The verb made. Decisive. Complete, accomplished. John Calvin comments that Christ, by one offering, accomplished what the law, with all its sacrifices, could never effect. That word accomplish is so important. It is going to matter throughout this entire book. This is not attempted atonement. Please listen to me. Jesus achieved atonement. Spurgeon once preached that Christ did not hang on the cross as an experiment. Jesus did not make purification possible. He made purification. Matthew 21, what is said of Jesus? You will call his name Yeshua, for he will save his people from their sin. Not he will come to make salvation possible for people. No, he is coming to make purification. Then comes another thunderclap right here. He sat down. Priests never sat. In fact, there was no seat in the holy place. There was nowhere to sit. The priest had no choice but to continue doing their work because there was no place to rest. It was always ongoing. But this priest sits down. What's the imagery there? My work's done. I did my work, I make purification for sin, and then I sit. Why? Because there's nothing else for me to do. I've done it. I've made the sacrifice. I've paid for the purification of my people. This is very important, and I need you to listen to this sentence. The priest who offered the sacrifice, Jesus, is now the king who reigns over its results. I don't think the weight of that sentence landed on you. The one who made the sacrifice, who brings the sacrifice into the real Holy of Holies, who is the high priest that mediates on behalf of the people the sacrifice was made for, he now goes and sits at the right hand of the Father and rules over the effects of his sacrifice. That's why Hebrews is going to say, he saves to the uttermost. Oh, you're not just partially saved. That's why we have stood and will stand forever, as long as Calvary Hill exists, on the idea that we as believers cannot forfeit or lose our salvation. And the reason is not because it's because the priest who sat down at the right hand of the Father makes sure that his sacrifice and his purification, the effects of that, do exactly what he intends for them to do. No Levitical priest could ever do that. They died. They were replaced. They repeated the sacrifices over and over and over again. But this priest offers one sacrifice, sits down one time, and now rules forever. Not because the Old Testament priesthood was flawed, but because it was temporary, it was incomplete, it was a shadow. This is the whole point that he's making. Jesus is now the substance. And this is why he is better. But another question needs to be asked. Okay, how come, and we've already hinted at it, how come his priestly role carries so much authority? How come Jesus' prophetic role carries so much authority? And how come his priestly role carries so much authority? Well, this brings us to the last point. Jesus is the better king. If prophet is revelation and priest is reconciliation, then king is reign. And there are several phrases in this sentence that basically builds this idea of Jesus being the better king. Here's the first one. Verse 2, he, the Father, appointed him, the Son, heir of all things. This is his royal appointment. This is enthronement language. Psalm chapter 2, God the Father is speaking to the Son. Here's what he says. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your inheritance. To be an heir means to sovereignly own. God the Father is publicly declaring that Jesus is ruler over all things. Calvin comments that the Father appointed the Son not because he was inferior, but he appointed him as mediator, the God-man who was going to receive the kingdom on behalf of his people. This is Daniel 7 language. Oh, you get to Daniel 7, what does Daniel see? For I saw one like the Son of Man coming before the Ancient of Days. Who is the Ancient of Days? That's God the Father. So he sees one like the Son of Man coming before the Ancient of Days. The Ancient of Days is sitting on the throne. And what does God the Father say to the one who comes before him? He says, I will give you dominion over all the nations. This is what Hebrews is declaring here. God has in fact done that. Jesus is king over all of the nations. This isn't a regional throne. This isn't regional rule. This is all things. There is not one square inch of the universe that isn't his inheritance. Not angels, not nations, not history. It all belongs to Jesus. Why? Because God the Father made him, the God-man Jesus, heir of all things. Look at the second part of verse 2. Through him, he also created the world. Here we're talking about royal authority. The king is not merely appointed, he is eternal. He existed before time. He created time. Jesus created everything. And then he goes on to say, not only did the Son create everything, but he upholds all things by the word of his power. What a powerful statement this is. Jesus did not create everything, set it in motion, and step back and see, let's see where this goes. Let's see where this takes us. This idea of upholding is present tense. He upholds. Right now, he upholds the universe. Continuous action. The universe is not self-sustaining. The universe is word-sustaining by the word. John Owen writes that Christ's kingly office includes preservation, not only governing events, but maintaining existence itself. Do you understand that Jesus, this one who has been declared the ruler of all things, this one who created all things, now upholds all things and keeps the universe from disintegrating and not existing anymore? He upholds all of it by the word of his power. And if he stopped holding it, we would cease to exist. That's the argument the writer of Hebrews is making. Every atom persists because he speaks. Every breath that humans breathe continues because he wills it. This is not distant kingship. This is sovereign, active rule. Look at verse 3. Just again, another one of these sentences when you're just blown away by. He is the radiance of the glory of God. That word radiance means shining forth. Now, I need you to catch this. Not like the moon reflects the sun. The moon actually doesn't do any shining, does it? It just reflects. That's not what this word radiance here means. He's not saying that Jesus is the reflector of God's glory. What he's saying is that he actually emanates from his own being the glory of God. That Jesus himself is emitting like the sun, not reflecting like the moon. That's massively important. Christ is not borrowing his brightness. He has it by nature. Then he goes on to say that Jesus is the exact imprint of his nature. That Greek word imprint implies a precise presentation. I want you to think about, maybe this imagery will help. I want you to think about a signet ring. So let's say you've got a ring and you've got, or even a signet stamp where you've got like, the crest of your family or something, or the king who has a ring. Well, what they would do is they would take wax and they would put wax on parchment and he would take his ring and he would push his ring into that wax. And when you pull it back, you would get the exact imprint in the wax that's on the ring. It's the same imprint. That's what the word that is being used here. He is not similar to God. He is the perfect expression of God. That is why Spurgeon said, if you want to know what God is like, you look at Jesus. There, in Jesus, the invisible God becomes visible. This matters for kingship because the reign of Jesus is not arbitrary. It is the reign of God himself. And then verse 4. We've already talked about this. I want to elaborate just a little bit. After making purification for sin, he sat down at the right hand of majesty on high. This is coronation. This is Psalm 110. Turn to Psalm 110. You're like, where did he get this language of sitting down at the right hand? He gets it from the Old Testament. Psalm 110, I'm going to read 7 verses. I'm going to read the whole thing. Now remember, the author of Hebrews is getting the idea of after making purification for sin, Jesus sits down at the right hand of the Father from Psalm 110. Here's what it says. And the Lord said to my Lord, let's just stop right there. Think about what he just said. Yahweh says to Yahweh. How is that possible? It's only possible if you got a Trinity. It's only possible if you got a Trinity. You can't make sense of anything that we're reading in this long sentence in these first 4 verses without a Trinity. It doesn't make sense. Neil, explain the Trinity. No. Can't do it. I can only tell you what the Bible says about it, but I can't do it. But here's what I do know, that in the Trinity, God the Father and God the Son are distinct persons, and they're both Lord. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. And the Lord sends forth from Zion your mighty scepter. Rule in the midst of your enemies. Your people will offer themselves freely on the day of your power in holy garments. From the womb of the morning, the dew of your mouth will be yours. The Lord has sworn, and it will not change his mind. You are priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. If you know Hebrews, guess what? It's coming back. The Lord is at your right hand. He will shatter kings on the day of his wrath. He will execute judgment among the nations. Filling them with corpses, he will shatter chiefs over the wide earth. He will drink from the brook by the way, therefore he will lift up his head. God the Father tells the Son, I accept your sacrifice. Now sit down, you're done. Then Hebrews adds this weird way to end. You think this is so weird to end this long sentence this way, but he says, having become as much superior to angels. Why are all of a sudden we talking about angels? What a strange way initially to end this whole thing. But I need you to understand, because there is an explanation here. The original readers had an excessively high view of angels. You think that we have a high view of angels? It's nothing compared to what the Jews had. The Jews' view of the angels was excessively high. In fact, they believed that all the great events in the Old Testament, that they were mediators of all of it. Even going so far to say that the Ten Commandments were mediated through angels. This is what the writers believed. The readers believed here in this first century. And so they've got this high, excessive view of angels. And then the writer of Hebrews says, listen, yes, angels are powerful. Yes, angels are glorious. Yes, angels are wonderful. But angels, even though they're supernatural, are mere servants that have been created. The Son has never been created, and he is the Son, not a servant. He stands. Or they stand, he sits. They minister, he reigns. A.W. Pink says, angels reflect glory, the Son radiates it. The angels actually reflect the glory of the Son. That's not a part of this verse, but that's the truth biblically. The glory the glory that every person has ever seen from an angel, that glory is the Son's glory. It's not that angel's own glory. They don't emit anything. They reflect. And they reflect the one that is emitting, which is Jesus. This is not a slight superiority. This is a completely different category. You with me? Completely different category that the Son is in. So he's basically saying, take the thing that you think is the most supernatural thing you can experience, an encounter with an angel. And he is saying, that doesn't even compare to what I'm talking about. Angels are nothing compared to what I'm talking about. So this understanding of Jesus as the better king is massively important to understand his role of prophet and priest. Follow me here. Christ's kingship grounds the authority of his revelation. Why is the revelation of Jesus, why does it carry so much authority? Because he is the one sitting down at the right hand of the Father. Nobody else gets to do that. Parentheses, except us that are in Jesus. Let that blow your mind. Go to Revelation when it says that we sit with Jesus on the throne. What? Jesus being the better king also guarantees the effectiveness of the atonement. Because he is king, as we talked about a while ago, the atonement is an actual atonement. It does something. It actually pays for sin. It actually saves people. Why? Because this priest is also the king. this prophet is also the king. And that's why it carries so much authority. The throne stands behind both the word and the cross. Now, this long sentence, man, is it theologically rich? I'm telling you, it'd be so easy to preach these four sentences, this one sentence and these 4 verses. It'd be so easy to preach 4 sermons on these 4 verses. So easy. Because there's so much there. But here's what I need you to understand. While it is theologically rich, it was not written merely for theologians. It wasn't written for the scholars. You know what it was written to? Struggling Christians. Struggling Christians who were tempted to drift back to the old stuff. So don't hear this message this morning and go, man, that's some really high Christology stuff. That must be what they deal with like at seminary and Bible college. No. This was written to the average Christian who was tempted to drift back away. And so the author's coming in right from the jump and he's slamming everything down and he's saying, this is why we don't go back, because who he is. He's showing them who Jesus is. And he's saying, if you see Jesus clearly as the heir of all things, the creator of the world, the radiance of the divine glory, the exact imprint of God's nature, the one who made purification for sin and is seated at the right hand of the Father, if you see him that way, you will not let him go and you will not drift back. You see why he's starting this way? He has to start this way because he sees Christians starting to drift. And he's saying, stop drifting. Turn your eyes back to who we're actually professing we believe in. And so he's getting their eyes back to say, this is who Jesus is. The drifting's got to stop. Because if you shrink Jesus, if you reduce Jesus, if you see him merely as helpful or inspiring or one voice among many, you will drift. You will drift. Because the identity of Jesus Christ is not a secondary matter. It is life and it is death. If he is only a prophet, then he can be ignored. If he is only a priest, well, you can supplement him. If he's only a king among many, then you can replace him. But if he is the better priest and the better king and the better prophet, if he is the final word, if he is the once and for all purifier, if he is the reigning Lord of heaven and earth, then there is nowhere else to go. And if these Christians who were struggling to maybe go back to the old ways, he knows if you go back to the old ways, you're going back to nothing. You're going back to something that can't do anything for you. So hold fast to him, admire him. Later he's going to say, let us hold fast to our confession. Let's not throw away our confidence. Why? Because if you do not see Jesus as better, then you do not see him at all. Because you can't see Jesus, really see Jesus, and not walk away going, he's better than anything else in the universe. To see him is to say, he's better than everything. And if you do not see him at all, then you have no revelation, no purification, and no throne to trust in. But if you see him, if you truly see him, then you cling. You cling. And that's what the author is trying to do to these Christians who are tempted to go back. Listen, the old ways were comfortable for them. The Jewish ways that they lived in was comfortable for them. They had known it their entire life. And the Romans left the Jews alone for the most part. Like you couldn't just worship anybody you wanted to in Rome. But the Romans had made a deal with the Jews. So if you were a Jew living in Rome, yeah, you wanted freedom. You wanted out from underneath their oppression. But they let you worship. They didn't destroy your temple. Not yet anyway. But here, You're now stepping away from Judaism to its fulfillment. Very different. And when things started getting uncomfortable, they were tempted to go, let's just go back to what we know. Let's go back to where they'll leave us alone. We're good over here. And the author is saying, then you're going back to nothing. Because Jesus is better than all of that. And once the better comes, the ultimate better, once the supreme comes, going back is going back to nothing. You see why he starts the way he starts? You see why he doesn't want to waste any time? Time was of the essence here. He needed them to read this and get right into it from the very beginning. Their very lives depended on it. So Christians, we are not a people seeking for the next better thing to come. In these last days, the better is here. The best is here. The supreme is here. And it is in the face of Jesus Christ. And if you are watching this online, or you are here today and you cannot say that the deepest part of who you are sees Jesus as better. I'm not talking about struggling. My goodness, he's writing this because people are struggling. But I'm talking about at the deepest core part of who you are. If you can't say, with all my being, I believe Jesus is better, then you need to get saved. You need to come to Jesus Christ. He will change your life.